all the change, 'cause oh, it's gonna come, yeah, it's gonna come.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Revolution and Beer Show, revolutionandbeer.com. We are the little show with a big attitude. We've got a great show for you today. The one thing I wanted to jump off saying, a couple of shows ago, we invited Representative Joe Walsh to come on and defend some of his points. We have not heard from Mr. Walsh yet. We know he's getting what we're writing about him, what we're saying about him.
Could be because his points are indefensible.
That could be. The offer stands. Representative Walsh, you are invited on this show. We will give you as much time as you need to defend some of the things you say. One of the things that I wanted to point out the other day was another ridiculous statement that he made about African Americans getting over slavery. And I wanted, in reaction to that, exactly. In reaction to that, I want to say if African Americans have to get over slavery, then I think white people have to get over. I don't know what white people have to get over.
The luxury of, or luxury at the expense of slave labor.
There you go. The privilege of slave labor.
And that's not all white people, but
or like a Japanese friend of mine said a couple of days ago after I had this little conversation with him that maybe white people should get over Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and those working class Chinese folks should get over those suicide nets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, Representative Walsh, that is the challenge. We've thrown down the gloves, so to speak. Pick it up and let's have a conversation.
Now, what do white people have to get over? Let's have that conversation.
What do white people have to get over? The other thing is, last night we were at a rally and a fundraiser for an end to a moratorium on deportations, immigrant deportations. I'm actually wearing a Shining Soul T-shirt. You guys can check out on our website at revolutionandbeer.com Shining Soul and the interview that we had with them.
If you haven't seen it yet, there's a very nice a cappella set, or just a song that they did that was pretty awesome.
Exclusively for
Drew quite a
Beer.
few passers-by into the fold there. It was pretty awesome. So.
Absolutely. And they were terrific. They're doing God's work on the front line down there, going toe-to-toe with Sheriff Arpaio, and just the general policies right now that this country, the wrong-headed policies that this country has about immigration in this country. And as we like to, there's lots of terms floating around for immigrants coming into this country, particularly from Mexico, but all around the world, really. And we like to call them at Revolution and Beer economic refugees, because it's really what they are. These are honest people that have been victimized by and large by wrong-headed international policies, many of them originating or at least protected by the United States, that cause people to uproot their lives and leave their homes and come someplace where they hope that they can have a better life or better living or safety or what have you.
I think that's my main issue with the xenophobia and the anti-immigration debate is the demonization of people who are just trying to better their lives, because that's what we all think we should have the right to do in this country. So it's really odd that you would project onto those people that they're somehow wrong for wanting to do that, especially when you have the opportunity to understand the kinds of trade agreements and things we're setting up as completely not only tanking the standard of living that these folks have in their countries, but completely changing their way of living and introducing them into an entirely different circumstance and way of having to thrive to get by than they've ever experienced before. That shakes people up.
It does. And ask yourself what you would do if your whole life collapsed, if you lost your job, if you lost your connection to a living, or weren't able to make a living for your family, and your only opportunity was to leave home in order to protect your family and to feed them. What choices would you make? Kind of try to put yourself in the shoes of these folks a little bit and understand their perspective somewhat. So that said, let's move on here a little bit.
Yeah.
We today are at the Elbo Room in Lincoln Park,
yes.
2871 North Lincoln. A great place with a great history.
This is more Lakeview, maybe.
Is this Lakeview? I think we're on the dividing
So we're in
line.
Lakeview, right? Okay, Lakeview.
That would be our bartender, Saul.
That's right. Yeah.
Who supplied us with this fine beer. All right. So corrections, we're in Lakeview. There's a great history to this place. I've been coming here for 25 some years. But there's some interesting stuff on the walls outside.
Very interesting stuff. Interesting stuff on the bar.
Yeah. This used to be a meatpacking plant.
Yeah, or at least a major part of the meat district.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they.
So there's some history here.
Yeah, and sitting on the other side of the pole here at the Elbo Room is Vinny, and sorry for the poll.
Oh, it's all right.
So
Not a symbolic separation, my friend.
no, we'll move on. Vince Emmanuele is a member of the board of directors for the Iraq Veterans Against the War, the IVAW, and just recently, within the last few months, they had their national convention, and the topic, and it was here in Chicago. The topic was US militarism at home and abroad, and I wanted to I was really excited to get them on. I'm very respectful of the IVAW. I think they're a great organization. And
At
a lot of amazing
IVAW.org.
stuff. Yeah, IVAW.org. And want Vinny to tell us a little bit about the IVAW and also how he wound up getting involved with them.
I'm going to stop you there first.
Okay.
We need a toast.
All right.
So
All right,
just a general
us on
toast to say
task.
welcome, my friend.
Yeah. Can't forget the beer part.
You can't forget the beer part.
Thanks for having me.
Sorry about that. Please go on. Continue.
So, Vince, tell us how you got. Well, first off, tell us where you served and what you did.
Yeah, let me start that way. I think it'll be easy. So I grew up on the southeast side of Chicago, 111th and J. Family's all union iron workers, steel workers. My
Salt of
father,
the earth.
Yes,
Good pull.
absolutely, and a great film, by the way.
Good.
My father was actually one of the only films that was banned in the United States too, by the way.
Really?
Salt of the Earth, yes.
Wow.
And the actors that were used within the film were actually the union workers who were organizing on the line. So some of the actors in that film are. Anyway, we're getting off track already.
Oh, that's all right.
So,
It's a great bit of
The beer's kicking in.
you know, my dad served during Vietnam. My grandfather was in World War II, Anzio Beachhead, spent 32 months in combat.
Wow.
2 Purple Hearts with V's for Valor, came back with shrapnel in his back, so forth. So came from a family who had served in the military.
Yep.
Came from a union background, working class background.
Yep.
And to be honest with you, I don't have a very sort of patriotic reason of why I joined, although I was a senior when 9/11 happened. So that was happening.
Yeah.
But the context for me was very vague. I didn't understand. I wasn't political. I didn't really know what was going on. And to be even more bluntly honest, the major thing we were concerned about the day that 9/11 happened at our high school was whether or not we were going to get a half day. That was the major concern. I know that's maybe too
And
cynical
your first
for some
thought was,
folks,
who
but
called it a
is.
bomb
No,
scare?
I think that's, being as truthful as I can for where we were.
Yeah.
That being said, I wanted to go to school to play baseball, like Division III school, Division II school, go play ball somewhere.
Yeah.
Wasn't academically interested, intellectually interested at all. I graduated high school with like a 2.0 grade point average. Didn't want to go to work. You know, my father was a union iron worker. During that time, had fallen off of a scaffold that collapsed. Broke his neck, his back, shoulders, hips, has titanium plates holding his body together. So after seeing that, I said, well, look, I don't want to go into the union and do the kind of, really tough work that he and a lot of his friends had to do. On the other end, I wasn't academically interested. So the viable third option for me was, hey, let's join the Marine Corps. Now, when I did that, my father immediately warned me against doing that. He told me, look, what I'm seeing now in the run-up to the war in Iraq reminds me a lot of what was happening in Vietnam, a lot of the lies, a lot of the vague rhetoric, so on.
So pattern.
But I knew better. I was 17. I knew better than him, of course. He was only 55 years old,
Yeah.
And so he tried to talk me out of it. Nonetheless, I joined. And so in September of 2002, I joined the United States Marine Corps as an infantryman, was sent to MCRD San Diego for boot camp. Graduated boot camp in December of 2002, so to give folks a timeline, this is leading up now to the war. Went to the School of Infantry in Camp Pendleton, California in January. Graduated the School of Infantry at the end of February and was sent to Kuwait in the beginning of March. So the timeline couldn't have been any more perfect or unperfect.
Yeah.
So you're going from boot camp, lead up to the war, School of Infantry.
And through that time, with 9/11 in context, through that time, there was already this a growing movement towards war in Iraq. So,
A lot of momentum, yeah.
No, and we saw them, interestingly enough, when we would drive around in San Diego, in the School of Infantry, you have weekends off. So during the week, you still have to train. On the weekends, if you're not in the field, they'll let you go out and drink or hang out or whatever. When we were in San Diego, we were actually throwing things outside of our car at the anti-war protesters who were out there because of the mentality when we were in the School of Infantry. A lot of our superiors, especially, were like, these people are hippies, they're traitors, they don't care about you, they want you to die, all this. I mean, just, I bought it. I was 18 years old.
And there's a very strong culture. I've spent a little bit of time around the Marine Corps in ROTC in high school. Nothing close to what you went through. But I do understand the culture that sort of readies the mind and body entirely for war.
Well, moving through that, the interesting part of that training for me, and what ran counter to the narrative that we were going to provide freedom and democracy to the people of Iraq, was that during that training process, the dehumanization process, not just the dehumanization of the people of Iraq and Afghanistan, who throughout boot camp in the School of Infantry were referred to as dot heads, even though we know that context doesn't fit, sand N-words, camel jockeys, hajis, so on and so forth. So this is the rhetoric, this is the training, this is the dehumanization that's taking place throughout the training process. Not to mention then, of course, as you said, now they're also telling us, well, view your fellow citizens and anyone who's not serving or anyone who's opposing this as a traitor or someone who doesn't support the war effort. So to condense the time period, that deployment was cut short. Didn't see much action or combat during that first deployment. Didn't have to deal with any of my best friends being killed. Didn't have to kill anyone. Was sent home early on a Red Cross message. My mom had a brain aneurysm. When I came home, I was running into a lot of folks that I went to high school with, friends that I stayed in contact with, who were coming back from their first year of school. So during that time period, it was, they're being exposed to different literary figures like Ernest Hemingway, Kurt Vonnegut, Hunter S. Thompson, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, all these great authors. Not to mention, of course, they're taking different classes where they're being turned on to people's work like Howard Zinn or Cornel West or Vandana Shiva or Noam Chomsky. So I was exposed to that during that period of being home from my first deployment, taking care of my mother.
Clash of realities.
Oh, well, I mean, blew my mind. Yeah. I really, at that point, was trying to figure, who am I? What do I stand for? What have I been told for 18 years, basically? You feel like you've been lied to for 18 years. All the rhetoric about America being this and this being this, and, you think to yourself, wait a minute. This
American exceptionalism.
It doesn't jive with anything I'm experiencing or reading about. So through that period, leading up now, this is August of 2004, was sent back to 29 Palms, California, to train with my unit, who was being sent back again. I was with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Alpha Company, 3rd Platoon. We were being trained again to go back on a second deployment, this time to a town called Al-Qaim in western Iraq, Al-Anbar province, just on the border with Syria, about 5 miles east of the Syrian border and just south of the Euphrates, a couple miles. So that's where we were based. But prior to that, I should back up and say that adding to this educational experience, I was serving with a gentleman who was a big film buff, was big into Michael Moore's films. Now, right around this time, August of 2004, Fahrenheit 9/11 was being released. We went to the San Diego movie theater, watched that film, and was literally on the ground in Iraq for a second deployment 6-7 days later.
That's got to be a head ripper.
Well, it blew our minds. Again, another one of those things. I remember walking out of the San Diego movie theater and calling my father and asking him, is this true? Could this really be happening? And and I guess in as least of a cynical way as he could put it, he kind of said, well, this is what I was trying to tell you 2 years ago when you wanted to join. So that being said, went on the second deployment. The second deployment was horrific in many different ways. A lot of innocent people were being killed and shot at. We were torturing the prisoners that we were taking captive. People were playing around with dead bodies, mutilating the corpses, taking pictures with these bodies. The rhetoric was insane. A lot of it was racist, xenophobic, really brutal rhetoric about, more Marines I was with during the second deployment were interested in how many quote-unquote hajis they were going to kill, as opposed to whether or not we were going to provide stability or support.
So major shift from your first deployment to your second deployment.
Absolutely.
And in your first deployment, would you say you were working off more of a community policing strategy within Iraq when you were there?
That was more the second deployment.
That was more
the first deployment was a straight push forward, almost destroy everything in our path, get to Baghdad, secure Baghdad, and then start securing airfields, oil fields, stuff like this.
Okay.
The second deployment is exactly what you mentioned, which initially was referred to as SASO operations, stability and support operations. Of course, then shifted with Petraeus and so forth into the counterinsurgency doctrine.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but Al-Anbar province and the Syrian border, that was the primary route for a lot of the insurgency coming into Iraq.
And that's exactly why we were there. So to talk about this time frame and context a little more, during that period there was also the Battle of Fallujah. So in Fallujah, which for the viewers out there is just southeast of where we were, so about 250 miles southeast of where we were, and then 150 miles southeast of where we were was Ramadi as well. So you have Al-Qaim, Ramadi, Fallujah. Through Syria and down the Euphrates River is where a lot of the weapons, ammunition, forces were being pushed through. We were essentially set up as a buffer to the war and the occupation of Fallujah. Yeah. So before and during the Battle of Fallujah, our job was essentially to intercept weapons, materials, support materials, and individuals who were coming across the Syrian
border. And to put
border.
this into context for your dad in Vietnam, it was almost like you were sitting astride the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And, of course, the vague borders, as we know with Laos, Cambodia. It's the same thing in Iraq. Actually, when we were...
maybe even more so.
Even more so. And you know what was interesting, to give people an idea of just how vague that is and just how much those borders in some ways don't mean anything to the people who are there sometimes. When we were going to register people to vote in 2005, they were telling us we live in Syria, we don't live in Iraq. And we're looking at a map, dumbass 18, 19-year-old kid from, the small town America going, well, you live here. They're saying, well, that line doesn't mean anything to our family.
Who drew that map?
That just sort of are on this.
Right. So that'll give you a good idea of just how, I think, vague that time period was, how confusing it was for the people who were there without a clear objective, trying to, just in what we call an AO, which is an area of operations. There were over 15 different insurgency groups. Maybe insurgency groups would be the wrong phrase to use. Some of them were insurgency groups. Some of them were local freedom fighters. Some of them were local people who just wanted us out of their farm fields. Some of them were drug dealers. Some of them were bandits. Some of them were criminals.
Because you're also dealing with a total systemic economic collapse at the same time, which is being facilitated by the warfare environment. And so that's when society breaks down into those different quadrants, or those not quadrants, but different constituencies. I think there's something about the IVAW that I find really fascinating is that, these aren't like the peaceniks that had cushy desk jobs or something, as some people might imagine or even try to say, that got involved with the IVAW. You guys are actually, and gals, are as legit as it comes when it comes to the service that you did to this country. And I want to thank you for that, because I understand that there's a lot of times that is not said outright. And I was taught that actually by a friend of mine, Michael Stoops, related to the homeless, like years ago. And it's how he used to diffuse a lot of situations with guys that were on the streets or in bars or whatever that were getting really worked up. And often for good reason. They were really angry, and he'd walk up and say, "Are you a veteran?" "Yeah." "And thank you for your service." And they would, no one's ever said that to me, so I don't know if you guys experience that very often, or...
We did, and you know what's interesting? Okay, so we are going to skip ahead a little bit, and there's really no reason to sort of go through the rest of the process of what was happening during the second deployment. I mean, what I laid out there was bad, things were terrible, we were not helping the local community, and as a matter of fact, the local community didn't want us there. But I should also say that they wanted to deploy us, because this is a very important dynamic for when we get into talking about PTSD, or if we eventually talk about that. Part of what's different about these wars is that they're sending people on multiple deployments, multiple deployments. That means going to the combat zone, transitioning back home, family, friends, so on, back to the combat zone, back to transitioning back home, back to the combat zone.
Exhausts the soldier, but it exhausts the family as well.
Yes, that's
and the community.
Yep. That's an extremely important point because people do not recognize just how much that affects the families who are experiencing these.
So now you're touching on stress, and which is something that we all like to dodge like crazy in this country.
One thing I did want to say is stay tuned for the folks. Stay tuned for the end of our show. After the credits, we're going to post all of the contact information we have. We want to know what you think. If you're a veteran, we definitely want to know what you have to think about this. And we'll have links so that you can get you can get connected to the IVAW.
Great.
Which is really important, particularly for not just for issues of PTSD, but for issues of community and sharing. And as we spoke earlier about, trust is a really big issue. And that if you need someone to talk to or commiserate with or to understand that trust is really a big issue, and there's no one better for you to trust than people that have been there and have been through all of this and can understand the language, the emotional language that you're speaking or the place that you're coming from. So we'll have that at the end of the show. But
so stress and emotion, right? I mean, that's something that's really important here. And I think, and I want to play on this because, you know, I have a real problem with people shying away from issues related to mental health in this society. And we've been going on, how many, like we're over a decade at war now. You know, we're going, man. We're totally, we're rolling right ahead here. And we're bringing people back that have seen very, very terrible things. You know, 2 to 3 deployments as you're talking about, and we can't even have an open conversation about mental health and stress in the society. So one of the things that I wanted to say, you know, of the IVAW and to thank the IVAW is that I see there are 2 main issues for two very important issues to me that the IVAW hits up head on that I think some other veterans organizations do not. One would be PTSD, and the other is allowing women that have served to come in and have an equal voice in what's happening. And I'd say as a third as well, you know, the IVAW is very, very much more abreast of gender issues and, you know, sexual freedom, the idea of homosexuals having, you know, a right and an ability to serve the country and to do things. And, you know, all these things that are stigmatized in our society, that's where I think the IVAW stands out. So on the topic of PTSD, you guys were talking quite a bit about this earlier on. What, you know, how did that come about with the IVAW? Why would the IVAW face that issue head on, you know, from the outset, more so than maybe other veterans organizations?
I want to jump in with one quick thing here, which is sort of dovetail into what you're talking about, is that the giving voice to the gay constituency within the military, the female constituency. And we were talking about how it's critical that women who are dealing with PTSD issues or the sexual assault issue, that it's critical for them to speak with other women rather than sitting in a room full of men. There's an alternate reality here with the IVAW, almost that it's the honesty. It's the honest portion of the military, because it really does honestly reflect the constituency of the military that's almost denied in the larger culture of the military. Does that make sense?
No, it's a very interesting point. No, and that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something that a lot of people in the organization, I think, have prided themselves on. And I think another part of this, though, to give credit to past organizers and people who have laid the groundwork for us, we've learned a lot of lessons from the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. We've learned a lot of lessons from other anti-war organizations who told us, you know, look, maybe the movement didn't represent society as a whole as diverse and as wide-ranging as it is. Going to anti-war movements that are largely old, white, and gray, so, you know, you look around and you're going, wait a minute, do I belong here? And I can imagine how many young people feel, and for the vets,
now it's old, girl, and gay.
Right, well, yes, no, yeah. And now, you know,
golden years comes out.
and the people, you know, they're coming home, and a lot of us, even as an organization, well, let me also back up and be very honest. As an organization, this took a long time. Okay, so initially it was white men who were running the organization, who were speaking at all the events, who had all the leadership positions, who were in all the paid positions in the organization. And not, I don't think, of course, you're with progressive-minded people. It's not as though I think a lot of that was explicitly done. It was inherent to our thinking. It was inherent to the way we behaved. It was like, so all of that was happening.
It was structural to the way we are as a culture.
Absolutely,
right now.
it simply reflected our culture on a whole, just in a microcosm, of an organization.
Or maybe some of the imbalances of our culture, maybe more so than clearly representing our culture. But
we definitely want to have that conversation on PTSD. I think it's really critical that there's a stronger conversation about what post-traumatic stress syndrome is. I don't think a lot of that gets into the media strongly enough. I don't think it's proliferated enough that honesty is there, or that clarity is there. What I do want to talk about, and we're coming up to the last minute or so of the show, is I'd like to hold you over. And we'll have another conversation. One of the things that was near and dear to us.
I hope you brought guns because he's a Marine. We're not going to be able to
and
wrestle him down.
It was important to us, and I know it's important to you. Is the militarism of the culture, of this culture and this nation, and without giving away exactly how we feel about this. We'll talk about in the next half hour the arc or the trajectory of this culture in a militaristic sense.
Yeah, I definitely revisiting some of the themes and the concepts discussed at the National Convention, because I think this is really important stuff, and if you haven't heard it before now, you really need to understand what's happening around the world and how the military is viewing the environmental chaos that is starting to happen alongside with the economic chaos and how they are planning for it and what that means for us.
So we're going to have that conversation. Folks, stick with us. We'll see you next week. We're gonna hang on to Vince here. Have that greater conversation. In the meantime, we'd like to thank the Elbo Room for hosting us.
Absolutely. And Saul, our bartender, for
exactly
getting here on her day off to let us in. And
you can catch more on the beer we're drinking. We're drinking a nice IPA today from a local brewer. So we'll give you those details. Catch us at revolutionofbeer.com. And again, stay tuned for the end of the program and the credits, where we're going to have ways to contact us. We want to hear from you. We want your feedback. Call Can TV. Let them know what you think about the show and how we're doing. Let us know what we can do.
And follow Can TV on Twitter and find Can TV on Facebook.
And show success.
Really solid content.
On that note, gentlemen, I'd like to make a toast. Here's to the holidays.
All 365.
We'll fill you up, pal, for the next one. We'll see you guys next week.
And I'm just waiting.